All right, it's 8 o'clock. We will start the lesson for today. And I've posted on the FB page the archetypes, right? Okay, so if if you're thinking about the topics, it's already on the syllabus and on the modules on Big Sky, uploaded on Big Sky. Okay, so we kind of integrate that today. All right, so we're integrating the archetypes and the topics. Okay, so here are the most common archetypes, okay, which can be seen in our myths. Okay, first, let's talk about symbolic archetypes, all right? So some of the symbolic archetypes which are very common, first is light versus darkness. And when you say light versus darkness, this is the positive and the negative overlapping and fighting each other. And they both have reasons when it comes to myths, okay? For light, there is the hope, the renewal, the intellectual illumination for light. And for darkness, there's that unknown, uncertainty, the ignorance, and despair. Okay? All right. And then in the Epic of Gilgamesh, we can see this in the way it's been portrayed, how the enlightenment of Gilgamesh is a renewal of his character, a renewal of his purpose. He used to be a very bad king, a very bad person, a wicked one at that. And he got out of that darkness. In the last part of the epic, there was a tunnel. And in this journey to the tunnel, it's all darkness. And he had to go through that tunnel so that when he appears at the other end, he will find the light and he will get the renewal of his character. Because before, he was wicked, he just wanted to do whatever he wants. He's very selfish and he tries to achieve immortality. But in the end, he realizes that immortality cannot happen to him. Okay? All right. So that's an example of a symbolic archetype in the Epic of Gilgamesh. Okay? So there's also the symbolic archetype of water versus desert. And this means birth or rebirth. In the Epic of Gilgamesh, there is a forest or a wilderness, and in that wilderness, it's a deserted place, a barren place, wherein they tried, he and Enkidu, his friend, his BFF, his very best friend, okay, that's where they hunted Humbaba, the monster. And the rebirth was when they washed themselves after that hunting. Okay, so that's an example of birth or rebirth, right? And then there's the fire versus ice symbolic archetype. The fire representing knowledge, light, life, and rebirth, while ice represents ignorance, darkness, sterility, and death. Okay, so in the Epic of Gilgamesh, anything that has to do with fire, has to do with heat, has to do with rage, has to do with anger, is an ignition of his knowledge and of his life as the king of Uruk. And then the ice, this represents the ignorance, the darkness, sterility, and death. In the last part, when he took a bath and left the plant of immortality alone, that was ignorance on his part. That is an indirect symbol of ice, the water during his bath. All right? Okay. It's also the death of his penchant for immortality, the death of his ambition, and the death of his wicked motives. Okay, kindly mute yourselves when you come in. Please mute yourselves. Okay, all right. So another symbolic archetype in the Epic of Gilgamesh is heaven versus hell, which is good versus evil. The skies and mountaintops house its gods, the bowels of the earth containing diabolic forces that inhabit the universe. Okay, there are diabolic forces, there are demons, just like the great demon Humbaba, and that is portrayed in the that lives in the forest, which is an allusion to hell. And heaven is the kingdom wherein every time Gilgamesh wanted to have a break with hunting and wilderness, he goes back to his kingdom, which is his heaven. In the last part of the epic, instead of trudging the forest, he trudged the mountaintops. So it's like him climbing up to heaven for the evolution of his character. Okay? And it's the same thing, or almost the same thing, as represented in the symbolic archetype of haven versus wilderness, which is comfort zone versus the outside world. Gilgamesh was very comfortable with his kingdom because he can do whatever he wants. So that is his haven. But he had to go through the wilderness. He has to get out of his comfort zone so that he will grow as a person. He will grow as a king. And most of all, he would know how selfish and wicked he had been. Okay, so that's haven versus wilderness. Now for the supernatural intervention, the gods intervene on the side of the hero or sometimes are against him. So we can see this in how the Sumerian gods have helped Gilgamesh during his quest and during his fight in the wilderness. And the serpent at the end of the epic, which took away the plant of immortality from him, is actually a god in disguise. So it's also a supernatural intervention as a god who has been against him. All right. Okay, so these are the common types of symbolic archetypes which we can find in the Epic of Gilgamesh. Okay. Now we move on to the next. Okay, so we also have the archetypes of seasons. And in Tristan and Isolde, we could see this very clearly. The archetypes of seasons, if it's spring or the mythos of spring, it's comedy. If it's the mythos of summer, it's romance. It's the mythos. If it's the mythos of fall, it's tragedy. And if it's the mythos of winter, it's irony. Okay, in the myth of Tristan and Isolde, if you remember, this is a tragic love story. Tristan and Isolde, they were not supposed to be together, but they had fallen in love with each other, okay? So Isolde is the queen of Cornwall, and Tristan is just a soldier or a knight, but he is the one who had to get Isolde from the other kingdom for his king. But before the wedding night, they accidentally drank the love potion that made them fall in love with each other. And since Isolde has to be married to the king, they had to hide their love. So it became forbidden love, okay? So during the course of the myth, we have the mythos of summer, the summer setting. That is the time when they had this torrid romance. And then when it's time to have the tragedy, that's when everybody finds out about the forbidden affair, and the king banished Tristan and Isolde out of the kingdom. That's the mythos of fall, okay? Explaining the tragic outcome of the forbidden affair. And then in the end, both of them felt, well, not really literally for Isolde, but Tristan died Okay, Tristan died of sickness, and Isolde is very heartbroken. So her death is very symbolic. Okay, so it's an irony because even though finally, after so many years, they found themselves in each other's arms, one has to die literally, and another has to die figuratively. Okay, so there's the irony. And it happened during the winter. This is to emphasize that the irony of love and the winter setting is both an archetype of season predominant in a lot of other myths. Okay, so it's just like the environment trying to show what the feelings of our protagonists are. Okay, so these are archetypes of seasons: the mythos of spring, the mythos of summer, the mythos of fall, and the mythos of winter. You might think, where is the mythos of spring here, or the comedy? When Isolde took the love potion and made Tristan drink it too, that is already considered comedy because it's not supposed to happen, okay? And it happened during the springtime, all right? Okay, let's move on. Okay, all right. Now here we have the hero archetypes. Heracles or Hercules, okay? He is originally called Heracles, but soon he was called Hercules, okay? Heracles is your typical hero. And what is a typical hero or the archetype of hero? Kindly mute yourselves, please. Okay, the hero archetype. First, the hero is the child of distinguished parents, usually the son from a royal family, okay? And then, well, we all know that Heracles is half god and half mortal. He's a demigod, all right? So when you say usually the son from a royal family, in this case, the son of a god, okay? And then his origin is preceded by difficulties or magic, such as prolonged barrenness or secret intercourse due to external prohibition or obstacles, a superior or supernatural force, including conception and birth. Because as we know that the conception that happened between a god and a mortal is magical because it's not natural, all right? So it's also a part of the archetype of the traditional hero in mythology. And then for a hero archetype or for a traditional hero, mythical hero, during or before the pregnancy of the mother of the hero, there is a prophecy in the form of an oracle cautioning against his birth and usually threatening danger to the father or his representative, or he will be a blessing to the community as a warrior and or a savior. For Heracles, this all happened. Hera was actually warned by the oracle, and Hera actually threatened Zeus. And then Heracles soon became a blessing to the community as a warrior and a savior, okay? And then next is, as a rule, he will be immersed into the water. All right, so there are many scenes wherein Heracles or Hercules has been immersed into the water, okay? Next, he will be assisted by animals or by lowly people or by women. Yes, and throughout his journeys, he had 12 labors, and in 12 years, he had to go through these different adventures. And animals and people who are inferior to him, and women, he has a lot of women, they were all there to assist him in his quests. And then a typical mythical hero will always have a muse or a partner that will inspire him in his quest. As a mortal, he had a lot of lovers and wives, but the best one to describe is Megara. And when he ascended into Olympus as a god, that's when he married the goddess Hebe. Okay, and then, of course, he will have to take revenge on something, and this revenge is justified because of his love. since Hera gave him a mental disorder, a temporary insanity, which made him kill his love and his family. He had to seek revenge for that. And he justifies it because he was compelled to kill his loved ones. And then finally, he achieves ranks and honors when Hercules was finally able to complete all his journeys and labors for the sake of humanity. He was considered as one of the best demigods in Greek and Roman mythology. So he had finally achieved his honors and his rank. Okay, so what are other archetypes? All right, so this time we will transcend overlap, not just from the West, we're going to the East also. So here are some love and war myths. Archetype. So again, we have the 8 types of love, which I've already given to you in your module. And then we have the consistency of goals and the attitudes to it. Like Mulan, for example, and the myth of Mulan. The myth of Mulan, we consider Mulan as a myth because the existing records do not bear enough evidence to say that there actually is a Mulan in the history of China. So she is still considered a mythical character, okay? So the consistency of the goal and the attitude is Mulan dressing herself up as a boy so that he could save her father from training for the war, okay? So, and then there's this retribution and redemption because in the end, she was discovered to be a girl and she was about to be stripped of her awards just because she was a girl, but then the emperor took her side, okay? All right, and then of course we have the character archetypes and evolutions. Before Mulan decided to be a soldier, she is a typical woman who is supposed to have an arranged marriage with a man. And she evolved, her character evolved when she had to sacrifice everything for the sake of her father not dying during training and during the war, okay? And then there's the love and hate collision. There wasn't any exact record that Mulan has lovers. There are records that say she has a lover, but this love and hate collision is more on her love and her hate for herself and for her identity as a woman, okay? So this is like a moral dilemma for Mulan. And then there's duty versus desire. Of course, Mulan thinks of her duty to protect her family, even if she desires to just stay home with them. The offense and defense, since they went to war, so of course there's the offense and defense. And fighting for love, okay? She is doing this to save her family and, of course, her country. And then the archetype of war, the passion for war, because simply war is part of the entire story of Mulan, okay? And speaking of war, we have the most famous war, mythical war, which is the Trojan War. And this is caused by Helen of Troy, okay? All right, so Helen of Troy, Helen is the daughter of Leda, the mortal Leda, and the god Zeus, okay? And she actually came out of an egg, and Zeus impregnated Leda by disguising himself as a swan. So when Helen was conceived, she was conceived like a swan, and they say that her long neck was very irresistible. Her neck is just like as beautiful as a swan's. Okay, she came from an egg along with the twins Castor and Pollux, her brothers, and in the first part of the Trojan War, or even before the Trojan War, we already have the divine and mortal interactions which happened. As you can see, I have here a snippet from the film that I gave you as an example in the module. Okay, so we have here the 3 goddesses in front of Paris. to judge who is the fairest, okay? So we have Athena, Venus, and Athena, Aphrodite, and Hera, all vying for the title to the fairest, which is which and each of them, they have different bribes for Paris, so that Paris would choose who is the fairest among them. Okay, so Hera actually promised wealth. Athena promised victory and power, while Aphrodite, or Venus, promised Helen, the most beautiful woman then in Sparta. Okay, so she promised that Helen would be Paris's lover or partner if he chose her. And, you know, Paris chose Aphrodite because she liked how Helen looked, okay? As you can see here in the apple, made visible. Her face was made visible. Okay, all right. Now, regarding objects of power and cursed objects, we have here the apple, which is a curse object. Paris had to abduct her, okay? So that's another archetype, the abduction, all right? And a rape, they call it rape. The moment you are abducted, they already consider it the rape, okay? Because why else would a woman be abducted? Okay, so that's how they think of the entire thing, all right? So Helen, at that moment, Helen, when she was abducted beforehand by Theseus, she was already considered a disgrace, okay? And because of this, what happens was Menelaus actually going to war with the rest of the other men, other Spartan men, who vowed to take his side, to fight for his right to his wife, who was abducted by the Trojan prince, Paris. Okay, so there we have war and invasion. Now, if you look at this map, Troy is actually a very wealthy city back then. If you would look at this map, it's the center of trade because the Aegean Sea is just here to the left, and the Sea of Marmara is to the right. And for you to get into both seas, for trade to happen, you have to pass by Troy, okay? So this is the reason why Troy is also invaded, not just because of Helen. Helen was simply used as an excuse so that King Agamemnon would also take over the wealthy city of Troy, okay? So here is a painting depicting the abduction of Helen. Can you see it, the painting? So many things are happening on the painting and so many colors also. So if you look at it very closely, there are so many colors and so many objects and a lot of men, and there's just one woman, Helen, who is being pushed into the boat to get out of Sparta and to go to Troy. Okay, all right? So look at this very well. Look at this before we move on to the archetypal images. So let's look first at this painting, the different images that we can see here, and the different colors. We have the colors red, the colors blue, there's the color brown, and then we have water, and then we have a lot of armor, which is circular, and then we have a bridge, and then we have boats, and then we have swords. So if you look into this, okay, you have different things happening there. Okay, so we have water there, which is an archetype of the mystery of creation, birth, death, resurrection, purification and redemption, fertility and growth. And this is an image which is very relevant to Helen because it's like her birth, death, and resurrection. Her birth because she will be a Trojan and her death as a Spartan. Okay, so it's her birth, death, and resurrection. At the same time, her purification and redemption. She was considered a disgrace in Sparta, but the moment she gets into Troy, King Priam of Troy would accept her wholeheartedly. Okay, wait, can you see it? And okay, would accept King Priam of Troy would wholeheartedly accept her, and he will respect her. Unlike in Sparta, she is being paraded naked for all men to take advantage of. Okay, all right. So this is the water that you can see. They traveled by boat from Sparta to Troy. This is for the birth, death, and resurrection, the purification and redemption, and fertility and growth of Helen. Okay, all right. And then relevant to water is the sea, which is the mother of all life, the spiritual mystery and infinity, also meaning death and rebirth, timelessness and eternity, and the unconscious. Before the Spartans were able to reach Troy, the city of Troy, they had to they had to wait for a long time and try to appease the goddess Dion, because the ships, they just won't the air just wouldn't push the ships to Troy. Okay, so the sea is this is an archetypal image of the unconscious, because most of the heroes are actually afraid and are having doubts of going to Troy. But it is their king Agamemnon and his brother Menelaus who is actually saying, no, we should go and sack Troy. And of course, we have to get Helen. Menelaus is just there for Helen. He just wanted to have Helen back. But King Agamemnon, his brother, he really wanted the city of Troy for himself. Okay. Now for rivers also. Okay. All right. Death and rebirth, baptism, the flowing of time into eternity, transitional phases of the life cycle, and the incarnations of deities. Okay, so after the Trojan War, when Odysseus has to go back home, they had to go through different rivers, and they met different deities. So it's an archetype also, the river. And it's like a flowing of time into eternity, because during that time, Odysseus and his men couldn't go home. It's like they were trapped in time, and it felt like a never-ending journey for them to get home. That was after the Trojan War. All right, okay. So another archetypal image is the sun. Fire and sky are closely related. Creative energy, law in nature, consciousness, thinking, enlightenment, wisdom, spiritual vision, father principle, moon and earth tending to be associated with the mother principle, a passage of time and life, which is relevant to the rising sun, and it represents birth, creation, and enlightenment, and of course the setting sun, which is death. Okay, so the setting of the start of the war was actually always morning. And when it's already time for the real war, especially during the war of Achilles and Hector, the sun is already setting, which is elaborating the death of heroes, or the impending death of heroes, especially our greatest heroes in mythology, Hector as a mortal and Achilles as a demigod. Okay, so these are archetypal images for Helen of Troy and the Trojan War. To continue, okay, so I ask you to look at the colors of the painting, right? Okay, so you have the colors there, different colors in the painting. Colors red, colors blue, white, black, not much, but there are a lot of red. And why is that? Because the color red is about blood, about sacrifice, violent passion, and disorder. So the predominance of red in the painting that we saw during the abduction of Helen from Sparta to Troy is because of the archetypal image of the color red. Red, which means blood, because it's war and there will be sacrifices involved. okay? The sacrifice of the daughter of Agamemnon, Iphigenia, had to be sacrificed, okay? And then there's the violent passion of Helen and Paris, of course. And of course, there's chaos and disorder because there is war, all right? Now, for the green, we didn't have much green though. And I'm wondering if any of you have actually watched 300. This is about the war of the 300 Spartans against a multitude of men. You cannot see the color green in the movie, in the film, and that's because green means growth, sensation, hope, fertility, okay? But then, in ironical context, it may be associated with death and decay. But originally, mostly, green is about growth, sensation, hope, and fertility, okay? And then blue, which is usually highly positive, is more or less seen in mythologies that have more positive themes, okay? So we didn't see much of that also in Helen of Troy or in the Trojan War. Because blue is usually highly positive, associated with truth, religious feeling, spiritual purity, and security, okay? So we can see blue in other myths, okay? In myths that do not have wars in them, okay? For example, in Tristan and Isolde, okay? Before they got themselves into trouble, the blue color is emphasized because it's about positive feelings, okay? And then we have white. We didn't have much white also because white is about purity, lightness, innocence, timelessness, okay? But we can find this, for example, if you're aware of Game of Thrones, okay, which is also a myth, okay, an appropriation of myth. Okay, so we have there the White Walkers. So this is because they also represent, white also represents death, terror, the supernatural, and the blinding truth of an inscrutable cosmic mystery, okay? So a good example of that whiteness, okay, or the archetypal image of whiteness is something that you can see in the Game of Thrones with the White Walkers, okay? The North, okay, all right, okay, and then black means darkness, chaos, mystery, the unknown, death, primal wisdom, the unconscious, evil, and melancholy, and usually myths talking about the origins of the world, they always start with black, okay? In Gilgamesh, there is that, like what I've mentioned before, that black tunnel, and for days, there's just darkness and blackness. It's all that Gilgamesh could see. And it's because it's actually preparing him for his wisdom, okay, for his primal wisdom. And what is this wisdom? For him to finally accept to himself that he can never achieve immortality. Because he was kind of envious with, with others who gained immortality. But the thing is, because of his wicked behavior in the past, he wasn't given immortality by the gods. He even rejected a goddess. Okay, so he just has a lot of enemies. He just has a lot of enemies, gods, goddesses, men, women, slaves, etc. And the only person that really loved him and whom he really loved is Enkidu, his friend, okay, who had died. And when Enkidu died, that was the only time that Gilgamesh actually found truth, found goodness, found love, and found acceptance. Okay, all right. Okay, let's move on to the next archetypal image. The next archetypal image is circle or a sphere, okay? All the circles, they connote wholeness and unity, okay? I have asked you to watch Helen of Troy. There is a link that I gave in the module uploaded on Big Sky, okay? So if you remember that time when the heroes actually had an agreement about who's going to marry Helen, and they had to cast their rings. This is a symbol of their unity. because they all had agreed that Helen will only belong to one man, and anyone who tries to steal her from this man will be punished. Okay? All right. So that's an example of the archetypal image of the circle. Relevant to this, we have the mandala, a geometric figure based upon the squaring of a circle around a unifying center, which is a desire for spiritual unity and psychic integration. Okay, so mandalas are, it's actually mandala. Sorry, it's not Mandela, it's mandala. The mandala is present in every shield of every warrior or every hero, okay? So in classical forms, it features the juxtaposition of the triangle, the square, and the circle with their numerical equivalents of 3, 4, and 7. But in modern versions, they are ornamental and labyrinthine like a maze. Okay, so the mandala, which is a geometric figure, is circle. This is emphasized in the images of the shields of the men, the warriors, and the heroes who are going to war. Okay? Then we have the egg, the oval, the mystery of life, and the forces of generation. As I've mentioned before, Leda was impregnated by Zeus, and their daughter is Helen, and Helen actually came out of an egg. Okay? All right. And then there's the Yin Yang, the Chinese symbol representing the union of opposite forces of the Yang, the masculine principle, which is light, the principle of activity and of the conscious mind, and the feminine principle of yin, which is about darkness, passivity, and the unconscious mind. You will find the yin yang because, as I've mentioned before, Helen has siblings, the brothers Castor and Pollux. They also came out of an egg. And they are the masculine principle, but they have lighter attitudes, they have lighter destinies compared to the destiny and to the attitude of the rebellious Helen. Okay, so the yin, which is the feminine energy and principle of Helen, is an archetype of the yin yang, darkness, passivity, and the unconscious mind, when it is integrated with the energies of Castor and Pollux, her twin brothers, okay? And then we have the Oroboros. The Oroboros is the ancient symbol of a snake biting its own tail, signifying the eternal cycle of life, primordial unconsciousness, the unity of opposing forces, as in Yang and Yin. Okay, all right. So if you know the movie or the book, The Never-Ending Story by Michael Ende, it has their oren, the necklace, which bears the Oroboros, the ancient symbol of a snake biting its own tail. Now for our epics, we have it in Gilgamesh, the snake who actually took the plant of immortality that Gilgamesh had tried to have for himself, but it just vanished and there's just a snake there. And it is implied that it's the snake who actually took that plant of immortality. And the cycle of a snake biting its own tail is just saying that everything is just a cycle. Everything is an immortal cycle of man, mortals, humanity, gods, mythical creatures, etc. Okay, so that's Oroboros, the archetypal image of Oroboros. If you have time, you go search for The Never-Ending Story by Michael Ende, because the necklace there is the exact image of Oroboros. Oren, the necklace Oren is the exact image of the Oroboros. Okay, all right. And speaking of the Oroboros, the famous animal archetype is the serpent. So every time you look at mythological films, mythological tales, if there is a serpent, then it's an archetypal image of energy and pure force, or of the libido, of evil, of corruption, of sensuality, of destruction, of mystery, of wisdom, and of the unconscious. Okay. Aside from the serpent, we have two other animal archetypes which are famous, especially in our topics. We have the horn goat, okay, which is a symbol or an archetype of growth. In the film Helen of Troy, Paris actually chased his goat so that he would be directed to the cave wherein the three goddesses appeared to him. Okay, so that's his growth, because that is the beginning of his journey to the history of Troy. Okay, how he's actually the reason why Troy was remembered for eternity. Okay, and then of course we all know about the Trojan horse, the archetype of the wooden horse, which is equivalent to victory. Okay, so if you can see, it's made of armor and wood from the ship. Okay, they used the planks of the ship to make this huge wooden horse, and the Spartans were inside, and they did this so that they could get inside the city of Troy, the walled city of Troy. And the moment that they were able to get inside, they waited until everybody is asleep. All the Trojans were asleep, and that's when they finally sacked the entire city, and Troy was destroyed. Okay. All right. And now for the last, okay, we have the archetype of numbers. We have 1 for superiority, 2 for partnership, 3 for light, spiritual awareness, and unity. The male principle, also the Holy Trinity, Orion's belt, and all others that are in 3, okay? And then 4, which is associated with the circle, the life cycle, the 4 seasons, the female principle, the earth, nature, and also the elements, earth, air, fire, and water. Then we have the archetype of 5, which is the sides of a star or of a pentagram, which is believed to be very magical. And then the archetype of 6, which is about wickedness and malignancy. And then the archetype of 7, the most potent of all symbolic numbers. They call 7 as the divine number, and it's a signifying union of 3 and 4, the complementary cycle of the perfect orders. That's 7. And then 8, which a lot of people consider to be lucky because it's an archetype of infinity, the symbol of 8. For when 8 is vertical, but when you make it horizontal, it becomes the symbol of infinity. And then, of course, the archetype of 9, which is about complexity and perfection. All right.